Well, written by Ayn Rand over 50 years ago. Did you know Atlas Shrugged is one of the most read books in the universe, if you will. Actually, it's second only to the Bible here as far as a book that people want to really read and understand. It's been a great book over the years for business owners, entrepreneurs. We all know Atlas Shrugged. What a story that Ayn Rand captured many, many years ago. Well, the fictional and controversial novel describes citizens who refuse to be exploited now by increasing taxation and government regulations, and you know what I'm talking about if you're in business today. And it kind of goes where people start to disobey the laws in the movie, okay? And some of them, and they just recently created a couple of movies on this, and people actually disappear in the movie. So anyway, something you have to see if you haven't seen it. So Malcolm all out here, welcome. I have a great production today for you here. Atlas Shrugged. If you watch the movies, you might remember protagonist Hank Reardon tells the court, okay, he's in front of the court, and in defense of his refusal now to recognize or obey the fair shares law, is what they called it. He says, these are his words now, if you believe you can seize my property simply because you need it, well, then so does any burglar. The only difference is the burglar doesn't ask my permission. And therein, folks, lies the problem here. It's a modern-day twist, if you will, that we'll present to you today, where fiction becomes reality as California raisin farmers protest the seizure of their crops by the government and their refusal to conform to the outdated federal marketing laws, what they're calling it now. And we'll find out more about that ahead. I want you to meet Marvin and Laura Horne. Had a pleasure of interviewing Marvin on national radio just recently. Terrific, and I'm so thrilled to have Laura, your wife, here. Marvin, Laura, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's Raisin Valley Farms is the name of the business. And in fact, the website I'll give you right now, it's raisinvalleyfarms.com is the website. You'll find out more about them right there. So you guys, what a story this is now. And I want to take it right to current day events. From what I understand now, there's a law in place which forces, if you will, it's not by choice, all of the raisin farmers in California, which is where obviously where all the crops are grown in California, they're forced to give up. As I know, if I remember the number, Marvin, that we talked about initially, it was like 47%, it's almost half of your crop. And I think that you were having to give this with no compensation whatsoever to the government. And this has been going on for some years. And as I understand, it's at 2003 where you kind of put your foot down and said, we're not going to do it anymore, which kind of changed this whole story and brought it all the way up to the Supreme Court. Bring me back to 2003 a moment, if you will, Marvin, and start there. Tell me what happened. What was it like in 2003? What was going on? And what made you take the stance that you and Laura took on this deal?
Well, it was a process of protest. A group of us farmers got together because during a period of time prior to 2003, they were just taking our raisins and not paying us for them, and we just couldn't stay in business. And we tried to do the regular quarterly protest. Go to your congressmen, your senators, hold rallies, present grievances to the Raisin Administrative Committee, but it was all to no avail. It was like falling on deaf ears. So the year in question, we had made it before. We just stacked our raisins up, says we can't deliver them anymore and not get paid for them. So,
and that was 2003, right?
Yes, actually, the 2002 crop was stacked up also.
So how long, I wonder, the struggle where you were trying to get, political representative to step up, how long did that struggle go on? Was it like, I don't know, was it 2000, 2001, or was it before or after that? How long did that struggle go on?
Oh, we protested, back in the 90s, all the way through. We had major meetings in Fresno, where thousands of growers would show up, and we had petitions signed. We took these petitions and presented them to the Secretary of Agriculture at that time, and we presented them to the Raisin Administrative Committee that we wanted to stop the so-called taking of our product called the export program.
Yeah, called the stealing program, you mean?
Theft. That's right, the stealing program.
The stealing program. We need to name that properly. So now I understand, because I didn't realize this. So this fight had been going on, sounds like almost a better part of a decade, huh?
Yes.
And you tried to do all the right things, as you say, try to bring it forward, try to get representatives to stop this. But it seems so far-fetched to me. I don't really understand the concept of how the government goes ahead and does this. Now, there were a lot of farmers that were paying up. They were given whatever the government was demanding of them, of their crops, yeah?
That's correct. They had no choice. They had to sell their crop to get some money. And once you deliver your crop to a handler, that's where the taking occurs. They won't give them back to you.
So there were handlers. And were the handlers part of this government agency, or did the government agency hire the handlers, Marvin?
Well, they worked together.
Okay.
The handlers and the government were in cohorts and developing this stealing program, or we call it the export program. And it was a transfer of, I can't tell you how much money. In the year of the 47%, it was over $160 million worth of raisins that were taken from farmers, and they paid nothing for them.
Wow.
Zero.
Wow.
The only people that benefited was the U.S. government with their food programs, their export discount programs for Europe and Japan and all of Asia, and the handlers. They became super wealthy during this exchange of value from the farmer to them.
So here you are all struggling in the industry, and other people are getting wealthy by it. I mean, that had to really tick you off. So, Laura, back in 2003, you had a quote that was put out there in the media, Laura, and you said you can't work for a whole year and then give 47% of what you made away and still keep that business afloat, correct?
Yes.
So when this happened back in 02 and 03, when you made the decision, please, that, okay, we're not going to pay them anymore, we're not going to allow it, you had to be scared. Wasn't that a very difficult decision to make at that point?
It took Marv and I a lot of discussion before we finally came to that conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an easy decision, was it, Laura? So you did a lot of a lot of discussion, and then but there was a breaking point on this thing, and you finally said, "What? Enough is enough." And I guess if it was put against any of us, and you felt in your heart you were being taken the wrong way, and you felt that it was wrong. I mean, listen, we all know the difference between right and wrong, okay? And if this had happened to any of us, I guess we'd all get to the point where we'd say, you know what, we're not going to do it anymore. And that's the point you got at. So when you did that, you elected not to give the government, because you were giving them part of the crop, and you weren't giving them money, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And then they would go ahead and distribute it and do the things they would do and profit from it with no compensation back, so everybody understands that. So now at this point, you kept the crop, and then what did you do with this? You decided, do I understand you decided to market it yourself, which you hadn't done prior, right?
Well, what we did is we started in the barn and decided that we would put our own plant in to where we would wash and stem, cap the raisins and sell them ourselves under our Raisin Valley Farms name.
So prior to that, you had not done that, right?
No, we had sold our raisins to a handler.
So now you became even more of an entrepreneurial mindset, because now you were going to market it and sell them yourselves. How is that going for you? You've been doing that since 03, 04?
Yes, we have, and it's been going very well.
So now you've taken out a whole other piece of the business, huh?
Yes.
And you're really doing what anybody else in America does. I mean, really, our free capitalistic society gives us this opportunity. It allows us to sell a product or a service, profit from it, market it to people. I mean, that's what America's built on. That's a foundation of our freedoms, is it not?
That's right. We feel like we should be able to produce the raisins and do what we want with them. Put them out on the market under our name if we want to.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, you know, it would be equivalent to, I guess, the government coming in here and saying, we're going to take half your shows, Malcolm, and we're going to do some things with them and so on and so forth. they probably would want the half where I talk bad about them, but that's another story. Or
well, how about if they decide they want to take half of your income
exactly.
and you only live on the other half? What happens then?
Well, and the problem with that, Laura, your point is well taken. I mean, listen, it's difficult enough to be in business today, as I said on our national radio show, and it's difficult enough to make a margin at the end of the day. Hell, like when somebody takes half of your stuff, whatever your stuff is, and you're dealt with to deal with the rest of it, that's a pretty sad day in this country, I think. I would have to imagine that this has, and I don't know the answer to this, so please tell me, Marvin, I would imagine that this has decimated the raisin community out there of farmers, in which is a big business in California. It's had to, like, turn it upside down backwards, yeah?
Yes, it has. You know, we used to have the most diverse farming community in the world. We had 2,500 to 3,000 raisin farmers, 20, 40, 60 acres. And when this program started, and today now we have less than 2,000.
Okay.
And it's just decimated families. They lost their farms. I can't tell you the pain and suffering a lot of these farmers went through. They quietly went through it because nobody was listening to us.
So, well, only in our own neighborhood, instead of keeping vines, they've pulled them out and put tree fruit in.
I see. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is you find another way of life, obviously, and you, like you say, you change it up. When this happened, I read somewhere, obviously this case probably divided the raisin growers, and as you just stated, Marvin, you lost half the industry pretty much out there, or half the, just about, of it. So, all right, so here's what I want to know. There was what I call, there was a legal defense fund put into place where a few dozen of the hardcore supporters contributed 2 cents per pound of raisins, I read somewhere, to this legal defense fund, if you will. But you also became, I understood that some farmers didn't like you anymore. In fact, some of them probably threatened you or hated you. What was that all about? Tell us.
Well, it's called the Dirty Tricks campaign by the RAC and the USDA. You know, farmers are not sophisticated with regards to the workings of a marketing order, and they presented this idea to them that we're stealing from them because we didn't give up 47% of our crop.
Wow. I
know it's absurd, but you know, when farmers are going broke and they're irate because they're not getting paid, they took their frustration out on blaming us because we didn't give our 47%. It's quite unusual, but that was their attack on us by the RAC and the establishment in the raisin industry.
Okay. So, all right, so tell me now, in the past few years, let's bring it to current day. So you go ahead and you take this fight to the courts in California, and at that point, I think they give you some challenges. They weren't going to hear this thing. Is that correct?
Yes. We had to go all the way through the whole process. The administrative hearing process with USDA, their judicial officers, and then through the court system here in the Superior Court system in Fresno, then the Ninth Court of Appeals.
And what did that take, a couple of years, all of that?
Well, it's been going on for 7, 8 years now,
wow.
Maybe 9 years.
We're talking, okay, right, 7, 8 years, okay, because you're now going after the government and the courts, and they weren't playing well. And then you brought it all the way, I understand, to the Supreme Court just this past year, right?
Yes, we were lucky to have our case heard before the Supreme Court. But that was an issue because of the Ninth Court. In the middle of the stream, the Justice Department changed their position. And all the hearings before, they treated us as producers. And then they made the determination, oh no, these people the Hornes are handlers, and they are affected by the Tucker Act, so they've got to pay it and then file a claim for refund. So that was the whole issue. That's the way the Ninth Court ruled. And we appealed that because we said, you know, you don't change horses in the middle of the stream. Our legal defense team, Kirkland and Ellis, specifically Mr. McConnell, Professor McConnell, wrote the brief and the writ, and it was accepted by the Supreme Court, and that's how we got there.
Okay. All right. So now the Supreme Court has ruled that the Ninth has to hear this again. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And that'll happen somewhere in the next few months.
Hopefully it'll be heard before November.
Okay.
The final briefs have been filed and rebuttals have been filed.
Okay. All right. So there's a whole nother piece to this story here. So, all right. So the story now takes us forward where, so if you followed me at this point, folks, so here you have this couple out in California, raisin farmers, they're producing this crop, government, it comes back to the history, and there is some history to this, all the way back to where the World War II, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Marvin, but at that time, there was a change in things where this marketing order came up, and the Raisin Association Committee there, they were designed, the Raisin Administrative Committee rather, they were created to really aid and help the raisin farmers at one point, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And so then, and it was all about supply and demand. It was that there was a supply of too many raisins on the market. Prices would come down, hurt the entire industry. So this committee came into place, then ruled by the USDA, the government, and then it was started, we're going to take half your crops. And it ended up being, initially, you were being compensated for it, but then you weren't. Is that what I understand?
Well, the marketing order was for orderly marketing, so that they would only release a portion of the crop throughout the year from the reserve, so we never overloaded the market. And as they sold that, the money would be returned to the farmer.
Okay.
Then somewhere in the late 80s, they began what they call the export program, and that's when the stealing started.
Okay. So this went on for a very long time until you said, that's enough. Laura, you put your foot down. Things in 03, so we're not going to do it anymore. Now you're 7-8 years in the court system. So finally there may be some relief ahead when the Ninth has to hear this. Do you think, in your opinion right now as you sit here today, does the Ninth come to a positive conclusion for you, the court system in California, or does this thing go all the way back to the Supreme Court again?
I believe that the Ninth Court will make the correct decision that this is a taking issue, and if they want to take our raisins, they got to pay for them. The government put their position is that it's the cost of playing in the game of interstate commerce. I don't believe that. We're all Americans. We're all free to enter any business enterprise we want to, and as long as we abide by the law, our product is our product. We should be able to sell it and not have it confiscated by the government.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Very good. Well, listen, I want to keep tabs on this story. We've had you on national radio. We're doing our television show today. We're going to put it out there. We've also contacted, very interestingly, folks, the Atlas Society, which is an amazing organization that, again, brings it all the way back to talking about objectivism and Ayn Rand's mission. And this society is very responsible for that and the things they're doing across our country. They were very fascinated in your story. I'm going to pause right here for a moment, guys. Again, let me just tell you again, Laura and Marvin Horne, Raisin Valley Farms, raisinvalleyfarms.com. We're going to take a quick pause. We're going to be back ahead here with the Atlas Society, and we're going to talk to them about how this case, what it means today, how does it really represent Atlas Shrugged, and is this a modern-day Atlas Shrugged? There's a lot more on this case ahead. We're certainly going to keep Laura and Marvin in play here to talk more about this. It's Malcolm Out Loud. We'll be right back with you after this message here.
Malcolm Out Loud is brought to you by Zillergy. Email marketing campaigns, social media tools, and text messaging. Visit Zillergy.com and use promo code OUTLOUD for special pricing.
I'm Gil Munoz. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, is that good people can fall into bad situations. Every tax situation is unique, so I'll personally review your case and find a resolution that's best for you. Remember, every tax problem does have a solution.
Well, good to have you back with us, folks. And coming back with you now is the managing editor of the Business Rights Center of the Atlas Society. And it's Alexander Cohen joining me here. And it really is. I mean, the Atlas Society, you got to go to the website. It's got all kinds of great stuff on there. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit here. But this really, again, comes back to, as I've been talking to you about in our segment with Marvin and Laura Horne, it comes back again to Atlas Shrugged, which, again, is a classic. You got to bring it all the way back to 1957 with Ayn Rand when she put that novel out there and changed, really, the mindset, if you will, about objectivism. Lots to talk about on this. I want to bring it back to the case again of this wild story of Marvin and Laura Horne. And there's a lot we're going to talk about on this. So, Alexander, are you familiar at all with the protest of raisin farmers in California that had been going on? This is actually, by the way, has been a problem that's been on for at least a couple of decades. It's not a new problem. They've been stealing
not by any means a new problem. The government has been trying to run various sectors of agriculture since the New Deal.
Okay.
One of the landmark cases in constitutional law deals with grain farming, actually, but there's also a landmark antitrust case about government, I think it was actually the state government in California, trying to run California raisin farming as a cartel to keep the prices up.
Well, that's kind of, by the way, how this all started, Alexander. It was a supply and demand issue, and that you're so right with that, because it brings it all the way back to their problem back in the 90s, the early 90s, and even before that in the 80s. And this Raisin Administrative Committee was to put in place initially to supposedly help the raisin farmers, but yet obviously they started stealing half of their crops and giving them no compensation back. In this particular case, Alexander, the Horns had to really break the law. They had to literally break the law to be able to keep their product or service and do what they felt in their hearts was the right thing to do.
I think, the question of the strategy of how you go about challenging an injustice is a complicated question. And I don't think that a clear argument can be made that one should never violate the law, and I also think that it's not always the best first thing to do.
Alexander, do you think that Marvin Horne is a modern-day Hank Rearden?
I think there are certainly significant resemblances. We see several times in Atlas Shrugged this effort by the government to control Hank Rearden's output, to decide how much he can produce, whom he can sell it to, how much he can, and what's going to happen with the revenues. So, for example, there is this scene, wonderful scene that we actually see in the movie of Part 2, in which Hank Rearden is charged in an administrative court with selling too much Rearden metal to one of his longstanding customers, and for that matter, suppliers. And he's charged with this under a scheme where the government was saying, this is the fair share that everybody is entitled to. There's actually another scene, which you'll see in Part 3, which will come out as a movie next year, where, at least I hope you'll see it in Part 3. I have no access to the script. But there is a scene in Part 3 of the novel where it turns out that the government is working on a scheme whereby he would be forced to subsidize his competitors. That is to say, all of his revenues from the sale of steel would be placed into a pool, and that pool would be divided up among the steel industry as a whole. And there are certainly elements of that in common, that has in common with the California raisin pool.
Yeah. Well, haven't seen Atlas Shrugged 1 and 2, and certainly I've read the books over the years. I can say that, Hank Reardon does get right up in front of the court, and he does take them on and says, I'm not going to back down. Very much that reminds me of the Hornes and what they've done with Marvin and Laura Horne and saying, you know what, we can't take this anymore. We're not going to be able to give you half of our product or service here. So, yeah, I think there are very much similarities in that case.
There are similarities in that regard as well.
Yes, I think so. Tell me now, I know you head up the Business Rights Center, and I'm thrilled to see more about the Atlas Society and what's going on there. What else can be done to help the Hornes from your perspective? Anything at all?
I think, ultimately, if the Hornes or anybody else are to be saved from these sorts of oppressive laws, what we need is to return to the fundamental principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That you have a right to your own life, that you have a right to exercise your own judgment about how you're going to run your life, including your business, and that you have a right to organize your life and your business for the pursuit of your own values. And that we should not have if you have a government that is trying to run your business, trying to run your sector of the economy, then you can't focus on pursuing your own values because the government is trying to force you to focus on pursuing some other good, be it the good of your industry as a whole, that is often your weaker competitors, or be it the good of the consumer, which is the focus of antitrust law.
Right.
Ultimately, if people are going to be safe, what they need is not better regulation, but respect for the principles of rights.
Yeah. Well said, buddy. Well said. Well, listen, it goes back to the courts now. The Supreme Court has ruled and mandated that the courts in California have to hear this, by the way. We'll know in the next couple months maybe, what the outcome of that is. Listen, if Marvin and Laura Horne are not successful in this somehow, in changing an industry out there by challenging the federal government, the USDA, the Raisin Administrative Committee, which is all part of the same, and if they're not, what's next after that? Is there a next committee to formation to rule milk or eggs or some other product, or maybe a product or service, and anybody that's business that you're in out there? Again, as I said to you before,
they have actually
other
regulations trying to run a bunch of different industries. You mentioned milk.
There you go.
I don't actually know the details, but there are a lot of regulations on milk that are built from this perspective of the government trying to run the industry, is my understanding. Right.
So,
and in any industry where they don't have something like this, what tends to be the backstop is antitrust law, which is also the government trying to control the goal of people's work, except in that case, they're trying to keep prices down for the consumer. And whether they're trying to keep prices up for the supplier or down for the consumer, it's still the government trying to run industry.
Yeah.
And that's still contrary to the fundamental principle that you have a right to pursue your own happiness, to organize your work for your purposes.
Yeah. Alexander, is the website atlassociety.com?
atlassociety.org. And for the Business Rights Center, it's atlassociety.org/BRC.
So atlassociety.org is the main website. You can find out more, folks. Alexander Cohen, again, managing editor of the Business Rights Center of the Atlas Society. We're going to come right back with the Hornes again. Marvin and Laura Horne will join us. And wait till you hear some of the things that they're going to talk about and how this went about, how they were harassed by the government, and some of the other pieces of this story. It'll just blow you away. It's Malcolm Out. I'll be right back with you.
Malcolm Out Loud is brought to you by Zillergy. Email marketing campaigns, social media tools, and text messaging. Visit Zillergy.com and use promo code OUTLOUD for special pricing.
I'm Gil Munoz. If there's one thing I've learned over the years is that good people can fall into bad situations. Every tax situation is unique, so I'll personally review your case and find a resolution that's best for you. Remember, every tax problem does have a solution.
Hey, welcome back to the show here, folks. You know, at the end of the day, now that you've heard the story of the Hornes and you've heard the Atlas Society's view, and we appreciate Alexander giving his views on this, I want to bring you back to really a big piece of this story, in that, you know, listen, it's bad enough when government comes and, you know, the taxes and regulations and fees that we all pay to be in business and enjoy the fruits of this country. I understand this. But on the flip side of things, folks, you'll have to admit this story is an absolute violation. And it is nothing more, it's a tantamount to theft, thievery at the highest level. There's no other way to look at this story. But then when I was talking to Marvin and Laura during the break and all, you know, there was another piece that we discovered. The Raisin Administrative Committee, which again is controlled by the USDA, complements of the federal government, there were some interesting pieces to this story in how they treated you guys, from what I understand, Marvin. Tell us again some of the, I don't know what, tricks, I guess, or dirty deeds, or whatever you want to call it, that went on through the USDA and the Raisin Administrative Committee. Would you please?
Sure. The first thing they did, we had the inspection service for the United States Department of Agriculture, the local person in charge of the inspection service, Mickey Martinez. He called me on the phone and says, "Marvin, we're pulling out the inspection service." And I said, "You can't pull out, Mickey. It's mandated by law that you inspect our product for the food safety of the American people." And he says, "No, we can do as we please." So they pulled out because they thought that because under the marketing order, your raisins have to be inspected. They actually pulled their food service inspection right out of our plant, which is mandated by law, and in the idea that it would put us out of business. That was the first thing.
All right, well, hold that thought. And what you said right there, what really grabs me and irks me at that moment, it's the quote, and this is, you're saying what he said, "We can do as we please." Is that correct?
That is correct.
You know, that just blows me away today. And that exactly is my beef with a lot of agencies in government today, no matter who we're dealing with, that there is this attitude that somehow they're owed something, that we can do as we please, and if you don't like it, and that to me is a bad attitude, and it's the corruption of our country, and it's what is going wrong today in society. It's a sad state of affairs to me that this happens on any level. But those words really grabbed me, Marvin. What else did they do?
Well, then they allegedly began an investigation by the RAC. And I'll let Laura tell about what they did in their so-called investigation.
Okay. They sat out in a car on the outside of our property with a video camera. And whenever our grandchildren would come over to the plant, or the children that lived there at the plant would go out to catch the bus in the morning, they videoed the children, so to the point that they were scared to death to even go out and catch the school bus in the morning.
These are your grandkids?
Our grandchildren, and then we have a family that lives there at the plant in a house, and they videotaped them. They would not go out and catch the bus in the morning because they were afraid of this man with the camera, and he kept videotaping them. So we told the parents, take the children to school. Don't have them catch the bus. And we kept our grandchildren away from the facility. We didn't want them videotaped. And we went up, my mother went out and asked the guy, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I can do what I want. I'm videotaping this." Wow. And she says, "This is my property. You don't belong here. Get off." But he sat across the street, so he wasn't actually on our property.
So they were harassing you. They were harassing your family. How embarrassing. I mean, and really, it sounds to me like you were put under a magnifying glass, yeah?
Pretty much.
Yes, and it didn't stop there. They stopped the trucks engaged in interstate commerce and told them they were carrying contraband. I mean, they actually stopped the truck, which is against the Commerce Clause, you know, interfering in interstate commerce. No charges were ever brought by USDA or anybody else, but that's how blatant our government can be when they want to be.
And these were all things to sort of slow you down and hopefully frustrate you and ultimately, hopefully, put you out of business, huh?
Yes, that was the beginnings of some of their dirty tricks. And then they began the whisper campaign, like I told you, about telling the farmers that we actually were stealing from them because we didn't give up our raisins.
Wow.
To create an animosity, an adversary position. And luckily, a lot of our farmers understood what was going on, and they stood beside us.
Wow.
Our organization grew to the point that we had 60 farmers selling their own product.
Yeah.
And that's where the contributions to the legal fund began. We decided we needed money to fight a big government like this.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to stop a minute and applaud both of you for just your spirit and your free will to fight this and to understand that our country is based on principles. Principles that you know darn well are not what's been happening to you folks, that this is something out of a novel. It really is almost something out of a novel. You know, at this point of the story, now that we've talked to the Atlas Society and we really see your story, maybe we need to have an Atlas Shrugged 4 and talk about the Hornes and the current day status. But your story is so wild. And, you know, it makes me think, if government can do this and they can do the kinds of things we're talking about here, what else are they capable of today? And how many other people and industries and stuff that we don't even know about where these sorts of things are happening? It does make you think, and it stops you in your tracks to know that this should not happen in our country at this time, no matter what. And, you know, again, a government kept unchecked is a very dangerous government. Laura and Marvin Horne, Raisin Valley Farms, raisinvalleyfarms.com. Can people buy your product and stuff through the website?
Yes.
Terrific. So let's all go and support them right there at that website, folks, and buy some of those great raisins. I wish the best to both of you. We'll be back in touch and keep tabs on this. I'm hoping and praying for a good result from the 9th, as you suggest, Marvin. And we will stay on this with you all. God bless you both. Thank you both for joining me. Folks, it's a crazy story, I know, but it's true. It's happened. It's right there in front of you. You see it. We'll be on it. You'll hear us more on radio and TV with us ahead. It's Malcolm Out Loud. Thank you again. Remember, get involved, get loud. Very loud in this case.